been a while since we've talked to our Filipino friends, so
Yeah.
we're gonna stir the pot with them now as a welcome back by talking about the war your American history teachers probably didn't tell you about, and the thumbnail was the Philippine-American War.
Yep. I know next to nothing, and honestly, there's a lot that our history teachers probably didn't tell us about.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but it's because we had to cram us through school, not actually absorb the information, just know how to take tests and do the same thing over and over again. But that's a whole other story there. I won't get into that.
All right.
Are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it, man.
3, 2, 1.
How do you feel? Are you Philippines? Filipino? Okay, I'll stop. I'm Mr. Beats, and I usually put bad jokes in my videos, like the one you just heard.
Don't try to be funny.
Yeah, but in this video, I'm gonna try not to do that, because this is serious stuff. This video is about a war you probably don't know much about. If you're an American, you likely didn't hear much about it in American history class, and that's likely because it's a war that the American government has preferred you just, not remember. You see, this war makes the United States look bad. Very bad, as a matter of fact. It's a war that some historians say killed as many as 1 million people. A war in which American soldiers committed all kinds of atrocities, including pillage, torture, rape, and the massacre of civilians. A war of imperialism in which the United States wanted to control the Philippines to exploit its resources and use it to expand trade throughout Asia. Here's the story of the Philippine-American War.
I remember we touched on it a little bit on the Geodiode reaction that we did.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess they'll go into it a little more in depth here, but yeah, that I remember seeing a few comments not so kindly about that. So
Yeah.
here we go.
Well, let's see. I've been, on my journey, we've touched on some parts of the Philippine War, but that's not the Philippine War. Sorry, the Philippines and conflicts that kind of ravaged the area during World War II, and/or the stuff that Nick from the Fat Electrician talked about, like touched on it. But I'm interested in this stuff, man. This is right up my alley for sure.
Yeah. If you want more of that, Daniel's got his own channel, Rec Nation, down in the linked in the description. But most of the stuff that is the good stuff is on his crumble cookies.
Yep, mean green. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Once upon a time, well, specifically, on April 30th, 1898, an American commodore named George Dewey sailed a small fleet into the Philippines, an archipelago made up of at least 7,100 islands in Southeast Asia. At the time, Spain controlled the islands, but it was quickly losing its grip over them. You see, for the past couple years, Filipino nationalists, or those who wanted the Philippines to break free from Spain so that it could be its own country, had been revolting. Led by Emilio Aguinaldo, these Filipino revolutionaries had lots of success by the time Dewey showed up. All that was mainly left for them to capture was Manila, the capital of the Spanish East Indies. Meanwhile, the United States was now also at war with Spain in what became known as the Spanish-American War. So that's what had led Dewey to take his fleet to the Spanish-controlled Philippines. On May 1st, Dewey's forces attacked the Spanish Navy stationed at Manila Bay, easily defeating it. You see, Dewey's ships were made of steel, and the Spanish ships were wooded. The Spanish lost 350 men, the Americans lost 0. And
Can you imagine how Nick would describe that?
Holy shit.
Like they just obliterated Spain. We just obliterated them.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, bro, you brought your rowboat to a battleship fight. Like,
yeah, like come on.
I mean, do you give them a chance to start? Like, bro, I mean, this is clearly going to be one-sided.
Yeah, and that's a good context. There is that America was already fighting the Spanish right now, so Spain controlling the Philippines. So I guess that was a part of it as well.
Yeah.
in what became known as the Battle of Manila Bay. Meanwhile, Aguinaldo wasn't even in the Philippines at this time. He was in Hong Kong. After hearing about the American victory in Manila Bay, he returned to the Philippines to resume the revolution. And here's the thing. While the Americans showed up acting like they were going to save the day, in reality, the Filipinos were likely going to kick the Spanish out of the islands anyway. Under Aguinaldo's leadership, the Filipinos surrounded Manila and turned over 15,000 Spanish prisoners to the Americans. Aguinaldo and his forces also officially declared independence from Spain. Aguinaldo also declared himself president of the Philippines. Meanwhile, the German Navy also decided to show up acting like they were going to take over the Philippines now. Dewey sent a telegram back to the United States to request more troops so that the Americans could fully take over the Philippines. That said, Aguinaldo and Dewey had both agreed that they would join forces to take Spain down. We'll figure out the details later. Over the next 2 months, more and more American troops arrived in the Philippines, enough to scare the Germans away. Soon the 13,000 Spanish troops in Manila were completely cut off from the outside world. After Basilio Agustin, the Spanish Governor General of the Philippines, tried to surrender to the Filipinos, the Spanish Parliament was embarrassed and kicked him out of office, replacing him with a dude named Fermin Yodenes. Yodenes secretly worked out a deal with Dewey to have a fake battle in which Spain would surrender the Philippines to the United States, not the Filipinos. That fake battle, often called the Mock Battle of Manila, took place on August 13th, 1898. Even though the battle was fake, 19 Americans and 49 Spanish died in it. Regardless, Yodenes surrendered Manila to the Americans, not the Filipinos, as they had agreed to, and that was the end of the Spanish-American War in the Philippines, for real.
Wow. Wow, that's the ability to keep a secret during that time and just make it seem like that to the Spanish people, Spanish government, that they actually lost outright and gave it to the United States. That's a hell of an operation right there.
I think it's nuts how the Spanish didn't want to lose that bad by surrendering to the Filipinos because they were just the revolutionaries, right? Yeah. The revolutionary native owners of the Philippines, obviously. So they're like, you know what? We're going to surrender to this other foreign power that we're in conflict with, to make it seem like you just had the let's say the better art. They had surrender to a equal power.
Yeah,
for their egos.
Yeah, not an inferior power in the current Philippines at the time.
Yeah. Wow.
And that was the end of the Spanish-American War in the Philippines, for real. After this, the Americans sent a message to Aguinaldo telling him not to move his forces into the city. And this, you could say, made Aguinaldo quite upset. Mucho. President William McKinley even sent out a telegram that said, quote, "There must be no joint occupation with the Filipinos. The Filipinos and all others must recognize the military occupation and authority of the United States." This made imperialists in the United States, or those who wanted to expand the country's military and political influence beyond the boundaries of the country, quite happy. One such imperialist was Mark Hanna, a U.S. senator from Ohio. Quote, "With a strong foothold in the Philippine Islands, we can and will take a large slice of the commerce of Asia," he said. On August 12th, the United States and Spain signed a ceasefire agreement. On December 10th, the two countries agreed on a peace treaty, unoriginally called the Treaty of Paris. That's the treaty that, among other stuff, gave Cuba, Puerto Rico, and Guam to the United States, but also let the United States States buy all of the Philippines from Spain for $20 million, or $722 million in today's money. Yeah, the Spanish and the Americans didn't allow not one Filipino representative to attend the negotiations for the Treaty of Paris. Now that the United States was an official imperial power, a big debate splintered the country about whether or not being an imperial power was actually a good thing. Anti-imperialists opposed the taking of the Philippines, mostly because it went against the values and ideals of the U.S. Constitution. The Filipinos, after all, wanted independence. They didn't have a revolution to kick one colonial power out, only to have yet another colonial power come in to oppress them. One of the most well-known of the anti-imperialists was the great Mark Twain, who wrote, quote, "I have read carefully the Treaty of Paris, and I have seen that we do not intend to free, but to subjugate the people of the Philippines. We have gone there to conquer, not to redeem." Still,
now I could see why this wasn't taught in school, because it makes the U.S. look really bad.
I don't understand how that worked. Like, they should have given the Philippines to the Filipinos, and we should have kept Cuba. Just strategically being honest.
Right,
Like,
right. That's how in close proximity Cuba was.
Like, for me, that's a no-brainer. Like, that over there, let them do it. Let them have that. Cuba, right? Basically visible from Florida. Keep that shit. We might need that shit in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Yeah.
You know?
President McKinley traveled the country trying to convince everyone that the American occupation of the Philippines was actually a good thing, arguing that if the United States didn't control them, Germany or Japan would. Not only that, McKinley argued, the Philippines could make the United States more prosperous with its resources, eh? Yeah, the occupation of the Philippines remained controversial, especially after Aguinaldo decided that he was going to start a new revolt. A new revolt against a new colonial power. The United States. Yep, he declared war on the United States. On February 4th, 1899, around the time that Congress and President McKinley ratified the Treaty of Paris, a firefight broke out between American soldiers and Filipino soldiers in Manila. Later that day, Aguinaldo officially declared, quote, that peace and friendly relations with the Americans be broken and that the latter be treated as enemies, within the limits prescribed by the laws of war. The Philippine-American War had begun. Over the next day and a half, 55 Americans died and 238 Filipinos died in the first and biggest battle of the war, the 1899 Battle of Manila. When the Filipinos tried to deliver a truce, Elwell Stephen Otis, the American military governor of the Philippines, rejected it. While the United States won that first battle, soon Aguinaldo and his troops had managed to take control of Luzon, the largest island in the Philippines, and they refused to let American ships dock there. In response, President McKinley sent a fleet of new ships there to put down what the American government officially called an insurrection. Aguinaldo had around 100,000, quote, soldiers on his side, most of them untrained and armed only with spears, knives, bows and arrows, and other simple weapons. The Americans? Oh, they had guns, of course. In the early months of the war, the United States mostly had success in conventional battles due to their superior weapons. Because of this, Aguinaldo had decided that the Filipinos' best hope was conducting guerrilla warfare, or a war fought by unconventional means. Aguinaldo had noticed that his soldiers were most successful with ambushes, or surprise attacks from concealed positions. He also had a very talented general on his side, Antonio Luna. Under Luna's leadership, the Filipino army was able to effectively terrorize American soldiers. Oh, And Luna's soldiers actually had guns. Luna's elite unit of sharpshooters even got the nickname, quote, marksmen of death. After this, the atrocities got significantly worse. First of all, American troops became increasingly frustrated with guerrilla warfare tactics because it eroded their trust with the civilian population. In other words, they generally stopped trusting pretty much all Filipinos. They began scorched earth campaigns, basically just destroying a bunch of the Filipinos' resources. They began relocating civilians to concentration camps. Yes, you heard that right.
So basically, the U.S. were a bunch of sore losers when the Philippines actually got their shit together to try and kick them out.
Yep. Well, that's what happens. That's what happens with guerrilla warfare. That's what always happens. The people that suffer in guerrilla warfare, the civilians suffer because, just as he pointed out, you can't trust anyone. You assume everyone's the enemy. And if everyone's the enemy, then guess what? I can delete many enemies. Yeah. Because enemies aren't people. Enemies are enemies. So that's where it gets very gray, very quick. And if you're seeing, let's say your people die and you're like, well, fuck this. That's scorched earth. And so that's the direct opposite of what happens in guerrilla warfare. Like the people that mainly suffer, civilians. All the time. Yeah.
Like better safe than sorry.
Yeah, man. Because that's the one thing that it's a tough one because it's like the civilians have to be like, yo, you're doing guerrilla shit. Either I'm with you or I'm gonna rat you out because I want my farm, my place, my stuff to go unburned.
Yeah.
So I have to give you up for safety reasons.
Yeah. And not an unreasonable request.
No, just we're just gonna basically firebomb the whole thing because we can't trust anyone.
Pretty much.
Concentration camps, where thousands, at the very least, ultimately died from disease and starvation. They often cut off food from being transported to the villages they didn't burn down. There were also reports of American soldiers robbing civilians of everything they owned of value. There were reports of rape. Some American soldiers tortured prisoners. One well-documented way they did this was through something called, quote, the water cure. When a Filipino prisoner wouldn't say the right thing, American soldiers would hold them down and force them to drink a bunch of water in a short amount of time. They'd often hold their mouths open with a stick and close their nose with pincers so the water wouldn't come back up. On November 27th, 1900, American soldiers gave Jovellanos Ildama, a Filipino who was the mayor of the town of Igbaras, the water cure. Sergeant Edward Davis later testified about it.
After they filled him up with water, he swelled way up, and then these two soldiers would roll the water out of him. They had an interpreter over him, and they asked him if he would tell what information they were after. He told some, and then after they released him, they wanted further information out of him, and he would not give it. So they took him down right there, and they took a syringe and squirted water up his nostrils. He would not give the information then, and they put salt in the water. Then he was willing to tell.
I should say...
Yeah, I'd be willing to tell anything after that. Whatever you need, just don't make me do that.
Yeah, you're basically waterboarding someone.
Yeah, but salt water. Oh,
Jesus Christ.
Ugh.
That most American soldiers were not doing this. In fact, they were probably just as disturbed as you are right now hearing about all this.
Yeah.
Many began writing to the media to tell them of the atrocities. One soldier from New York wrote, "Last night one of our boys was found shot and his stomach cut open. Immediately orders were received from General Wheaton to burn the town and kill every native in sight, which was done to a finish. About 1,000 men, women, and children were reported killed. I am probably growing hard-hearted, for I am in my glory when I can sight my gun in on some dark skin and pull the trigger. After the media published stories like this, many Americans back home got angry and began to protest the war. The War Department even conducted a major investigation. When Elwell Otis found out about his soldiers writing to the media, he freaked out, launching a major PR campaign to downplay these reports. He even tracked down some of the soldiers who wrote the letters, forcing them to write a retraction and court-martialing them if they refused to do so. But even generals were turning against Otis, like General Reeve of the 13th Minnesota Regiment, who wrote, quote, "It seems to me that we are doing something that is contrary to our principles in the past." But it wasn't just American soldiers guilty of atrocities. The Filipino soldiers tortured American prisoners too. There were reports that they buried American soldiers alive. Here's another, report.
An American prisoner had been buried in the ground with only his head projecting. His mouth had been propped open with a stick. A trail of sugar laid to it through the forest, and a handful thrown into it. Millions of ants had done the rest.
That's fair. Yeah.
Yeah, that's you know, I mean, like here, it's tough. It's tough. It's like when you go full out war, you can't get squeamish when war shit happens.
Yeah, right. That's just the reality of a lot of it. I wouldn't know firsthand, but yeah. The water torture and the sugar ant in the mouth. War is hell.
Yep.
From what I've heard.
Goodness. Filipino soldiers reportedly mutilated American soldiers and slowly killed them so that they would suffer. By the end of the war, Filipino sharpshooters were targeting chaplains, doctors, nurses, and even wounded soldiers. On June 5th, 1899, the Filipino Army lost its best general in kind of a crazy way. Members of Aguinaldo's own cabinet assassinated Antonio Luna. This was a huge loss for the Filipino Army. On December 20th, 1900, General Arthur MacArthur, who had taken over as the American military governor of the Philippines after Otis stepped down a few months prior, placed the entire Philippines under martial law. However, this just further eroded trust between American soldiers and Filipino civilians. By early 1901, things were not going well at all for the Filipino Army. They had lost control of most of their territory and thousands of soldiers. But things really got discouraging for them after the capture of their leader, Emilio Aguinaldo, on March 23, 1901. American soldiers were able to capture him after pretending to be prisoners of war, escorted by other American soldiers in Philippine Army uniforms. Aguinaldo didn't give up much of a resistance. He was exhausted by that point and tired of seeing Filipinos killed. On April 1st, Aguinaldo swore an oath accepting that the United States did now officially control the Philippines. He even swore allegiance to the American government. On April 19th, he issued a formal surrender telling his followers to put down their weapons and give up the fight. That said, not all Filipinos were ready to do that, and sporadic hostilities would continue over the next 12 years. General Miguel Malvar took Aguinaldo's place as the new leader of the Filipino government, while he launched a series of new attacks on American troops for the rest of the year. Ultimately, he'd surrender too on April 16, 1902. By this time, Theodore Roosevelt was now president after the assassination of William McKinley a few months prior. Once a huge imperialist, by now, even Roosevelt was questioning why the heck the United States was still fighting this war. He pushed for a solution to end the war and a path for the Filipinos to eventually govern themselves. To help them do that, he appointed his friend William Taft as civil governor of the archipelago. Ultimately, the war ended. Well, the main part of the war ended when the United States government promised the Filipinos that they could self-govern as long as the United States government could still kind of control them and protect them. and,
exploit their natural resources.
the main part of the Philippine-American War officially ended on July 2nd, 1902, after Congress passed the Philippine Organic Act, a law that included the establishment of a Bill of Rights for Filipinos and a Filipino-led representative government, assuming hostilities ended. Heck, President Roosevelt even proclaimed full and complete forgiveness and amnesty to all Filipinos who had participated in the conflict. Well, hostilities did end. Okay, they mostly ended. Technically, the war still carried on in the southern Philippines, where a group known as the Moros continued to resist American occupation in what became known as the Moro Rebellion. The Moros were only finally defeated after the Battle of Budbaksak on June 15th, 1913. After this, the United States controlled the Philippines and protected it for the next 33 years. That's when the Philippines finally achieved full independence. The Philippine-American War was objectively a disaster for everyone involved. It was a painful reminder that imperialism often just leads to the horrible subjugation of a people. In fact, this war single-handedly turned Americans against imperialism, and even got the once staunch imperialist Teddy Roosevelt questioning himself. The war highlighted the importance of respecting the sovereignty of other nations. It also exposed the terrible racism toward Filipinos. American soldiers done messed up with their treatment of them. In conclusion, you probably weren't taught much about the Philippine-American War in history class, unless you're Filipino, of course, but it's an important war that we need to learn from. But Mr. Beat, are you bringing up this war because you hate America? No, I am bringing up this war because we must learn from the mistakes of the past in order to achieve our goals of peace, justice, and equality. After all, if we ignore these mistakes of the past, we're more likely to just repeat them.
Yep, there we go.
Yeah.
There we go. Man,
Best reason.
that's a big eye-opener, this whole learning of the Philippine-American War. Like, I understand why it wasn't taught, because it would paint us in a very bad light. And, there's no room for it in the curriculum. But, my big takeaways from it are, one, that's what stopped America from continuing its imperial ways, trying to take over all of the world.
Yeah.
And it makes me now go back and look at all the videos that we've checked out about the Philippine people and their affinity for American stuff. Is that based off of that? Or do a lot of them still hold ill will towards us for all that time? I'm now asking a lot more questions now.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, I feel like there's a resentment to anyone that has ever tried to colonize your country.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like that's a well-rooted resentment. Understandably so.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
But hey, we can at least do our part in spreading the story, the history.
Yeah.
Which is very important to get out there to everyone.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm grateful for Mr. Beat here for putting this one together.
Yeah,
and made it a lot more digestible and more understanding of, what exactly went on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing is, you can't come at history with this whole it's almost unbiased, because this shit just happened. It happened.
Right. You can't change history because you don't like it. History is history.
History is history. And especially when you're talking about war history, it is what it is. It's terrible, but we can't change that shit. We just got to keep talking about it and not forget it.
Right. And not repeat it. That's the main thing.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway, is there any other history things about the Philippines or any other country that we need to learn about?
Yes.
Put it down in the comments.
Yes.
And thanks for watching. Subscribe, watch another video. Thanks, channel members. What now, Dan?
Unplug and do something legendary, guys.
We'll see y'all next time.
Later.